Sarah Whitmore woke at 3:33 in the morning with the cold press of metal against her cheek, and when she reached beneath her pillow to investigate what had disturbed her sleep, her fingers closed around a keyring she had watched the locksmith destroy 14 hours earlier. The old keys to her front door and back door and bedroom that should have been nothing but twisted scrap metal at the bottom of a recycling bin 3 miles away. The keys were warm, as if someone had been holding them in their hand just moments before placing them where she would find them, and they smelled faintly of a cologne she recognized from somewhere she could not quite remember, a scent that made her stomach clench with a fear that predated conscious thought. She did not scream, though every instinct demanded it. She lay perfectly still in the darkness of her bedroom, the keys clutched in her fist, her ears straining for any sound that might indicate she was not alone in the house she had secured so carefully just that afternoon. The locksmith had been thorough, replacing every exterior lock and adding deadbolts she had not previously possessed, installing a chain on the front door and window locks on every ground floor opening. She had watched him test each mechanism personally, had kept the only copies of the new keys on her person every moment since, had checked every closet and under every bed before allowing herself to sleep in what she had finally believed was a safe space. The keys in her hand made a mockery of that belief, their familiar weight and shape announcing that whatever she had tried to lock out had never truly been locked out at all. These were not copies made from the new locks. These were the original keys, the ones she had surrendered to the locksmith for destruction, the ones that should not exist in any form that could be held or placed or used. Someone had retrieved them from wherever destroyed keys went, had restored them or replaced them or conjured them through means she could not comprehend, and had entered her home while she slept to leave them as a message whose meaning she understood perfectly without needing words to spell it out. The message was simple. There is no lock I cannot open. There is no door I cannot pass. There is no safety you can purchase or construct or imagine that will keep me from reaching you whenever I choose. Sarah had changed the locks because of the photographs. They had started appearing 3 weeks ago, slipped under her door, or left on her car windshield, or tucked into her mailbox between legitimate correspondence, photographs of her sleeping in her own bed, taken from angles that should have been impossible unless the photographer had been standing directly beside her. The images showed her in various stages of slumber, peaceful and vulnerable, and utterly unaware that someone was documenting her most private moments with a camera whose flash she had never noticed, whose shutter sound she had never heard. The first photograph had been terrifying. The 7th had been paralyzing. The 12th had driven her to the locksmith with a desperation that had probably doubled his usual fee. The police had been sympathetic but ultimately useless, taking reports that disappeared into a system designed to process crimes after they occurred rather than prevent them from happening. They had dusted for fingerprints and found nothing. They had canvassed neighbors who had seen nothing. They had suggested she stay with friends or family, an option that felt less like protection and more like surrender, an admission that her home was no longer hers, that someone else had claimed it through intimidation and invasion. Sarah had refused to leave. This was her house, purchased with her money, filled with her possessions and her memories and her life. She would not be driven from it by a coward who operated in darkness and left no trace but terror. That defiance felt foolish now, lying in her bed with keys that should not exist pressing their impossible reality into her palm. She forced herself to breathe slowly, to think through the panic that threatened to overwhelm her capacity for reason. Whoever was doing this wanted her afraid. They wanted her to feel hunted, vulnerable, constantly aware of their presence, even when they were not physically there. Every photograph, every violation, every impossible demonstration of access was designed to erode her sense of security until she existed in a state of permanent terror that they controlled completely. She would not give them that satisfaction. She would not. Sarah rose from her bed with movements designed to appear natural, stretching as if she had woken from normal sleep, yawning as if nothing unusual had occurred. If they were watching, and she had to assume they were always watching, she wanted them to see someone unafraid, someone whose resolve had not been broken by their latest violation. She walked to the bathroom and turned on the light, squinting against the brightness while her eyes adjusted, avoiding the mirror where she knew her expression would betray the terror she was working so hard to suppress. The bathroom looked exactly as she had left it before bed, every toiletry in its proper place, every towel hung on its designated hook, no indication that anyone had been there, except the subtle wrongness that she could feel rather than see. Something was different. Something had been touched or moved or examined and returned to position with almost but not quite perfect accuracy. She scanned the small room, searching for the discrepancy, her eyes landing finally on the medicine cabinet that hung above the sink, its mirrored door closed, but not quite flush with the frame, a gap of perhaps a millimeter that she would never have left. She opened the cabinet and found another photograph waiting inside, propped against the bottles of aspirin and allergy medication and the prescription sleeping pills she had stopped taking when the violations began because unconsciousness had become too dangerous to risk. The photograph showed her standing in this exact bathroom, brushing her teeth, wearing the same pajamas she wore now, the time stamp in the corner indicating it had been taken less than 2 hours ago. She had not noticed anyone in the mirror behind her. She had not heard anything unusual while she performed her nightly routine. But someone had been there, close enough to capture the toothpaste foam at the corner of her mouth, close enough to document the small scar on her shoulder from a childhood bicycle accident, close enough to touch her if they had chosen to do so. Sarah's hands trembled as she placed the photograph on the counter, her carefully constructed calm crumbling under the weight of accumulated violation. This was not just surveillance. This was intimacy forced upon her, closeness she had not consented to, a relationship created entirely through the power differential of watcher and watched. Whoever was doing this knew her better than her closest friends, had observed her in moments she shared with no one, had claimed access to the private rituals that defined her daily existence. They had made her life into their possession, and she did not know how to take it back. The house felt different as she moved through it, turning on lights in every room, checking locks that she knew were meaningless, searching for evidence of entry that she knew she would not find. The stalker left no traces except the ones they chose to leave, demonstrated skills that suggested training or experience far beyond what an ordinary obsessive would possess. Sarah had researched her situation exhaustively in the weeks since the photographs began, reading accounts from other victims whose experiences mirrored her own, learning about the technology and techniques that enabled this level of intrusion. Nothing she had learned explained how someone could retrieve destroyed keys and place them under the pillow of a sleeping woman without waking her, without triggering the motion sensors she had installed. without leaving any forensic evidence of their presence. The living room showed no signs of disturbance, every piece of furniture positioned exactly as she remembered, every book on the shelf aligned according to her particular system, every decorative object maintaining the arrangement she had established years ago. But on the coffee table, placed precisely in the center where she could not fail to notice it, sat a single white rose in a vase she did not own, its petals fresh and unblemished, its stem cut at an angle that suggested professional florist training. There was a card attached to the vase, cream-colored paper with handwriting she had never seen before, elegant script that seemed almost feminine in its careful construction. The card read only 3 words, "I love you." Sarah felt her legs weaken beneath her, the declaration more terrifying than any threat could have been. This was not random targeting or opportunity crime or the impersonal obsession of a stranger who had fixated on her image. This was someone who believed they had a relationship with her, who experienced their violations as expressions of devotion, who genuinely felt that placing destroyed keys under her pillow and photographing her while she slept were acts of affection rather than assault. The love of a person like this was more dangerous than their hatred would have been, because it would not fade or lose interest or move on to other targets. It would persist and escalate and eventually demand reciprocation that she could never provide. The kitchen offered the next discovery, a breakfast already prepared and waiting on the table she never used for meals. Scrambled eggs and toast and fresh orange juice, arranged with presentation worthy of a restaurant. Steam still rising from food that should have been cold if it had been placed there while she slept. The meal was accompanied by a folded newspaper opened to an article about a woman in another state who had been killed by a stalker after years of escalating contact. The victim's photograph circled in red ink with a question mark drawn beside it. The message was clear. This could be you, but I am choosing to feed you instead, to care for you, to demonstrate love in ways that should make you grateful rather than afraid. Sarah called the police again, knowing the futility, but needing the illusion of action, needing to feel like she was doing something other than waiting for the next violation to occur. The responding officers were different from the ones who had taken her previous reports, younger and less experienced and clearly skeptical of a woman who claimed that someone had broken into her home to make her breakfast. They documented the rose and the meal and the keys she had retrieved from under her pillow, took photographs of their own that seemed almost ironic given the circumstances, promised to file reports that would join the growing stack of paperwork that constituted the only official acknowledgment of her nightmare. One of the officers, a woman not much younger than Sarah herself, pulled her aside before leaving and spoke in a whisper that her partner could not hear. She said she believed Sarah believed something was happening that the system was not equipped to address, believed the danger was real, even if it left no evidence the department could act upon. She gave Sarah a card with a phone number handwritten on the back, the contact information for a private investigator who specialized in cases the police could not or would not solve. She said to call immediately, to not wait for the next incident, to understand that situations like this rarely resolve themselves through inaction. Sarah called the number as soon as the police car disappeared down her street, reaching a man whose voice carried the weight of too many similar conversations, too many women in too much danger who had waited too long to seek help. His name was Daniel Marsh, and he asked questions that revealed an understanding of her situation that the police had never demonstrated. He asked about her daily routines and her social connections and her employment history. He asked about former relationships and family conflicts, and anyone who might have developed fixations she had dismissed or overlooked. And he asked about her house specifically, about its history, about who had lived there before her, about anything unusual she had noticed since moving in 3 years ago. The question about the house struck something in Sarah's memory that she had long since filed away as unimportant. The previous owner had died under circumstances the real estate agent had been legally required to disclose but had minimized with professional skill. An elderly woman living alone, found by a neighbor after several days of newspapers accumulating on the porch. Cause of death listed as natural, but investigated initially as something more sinister. There had been a son who contested the estate sale, who had appeared at the closing with objections the lawyers had overruled, who had looked at Sarah with an expression she had attributed to grief, but now recognized as something else entirely. Daniel Marsh listened to this information with a silence that communicated more than words would have, the pause of a professional connecting pieces that the victim had been too close to see. He said he would investigate the son, would examine the history more thoroughly, would return with information that might explain what was happening and how to stop it. But he also said something that settled into Sarah's chest like a cold stone. He said that in his experience, situations that had escalated to this degree rarely ended with the stalker simply giving up. He said that she needed to prepare for the possibility that this would get worse before it could get better. He said that she should consider leaving the house immediately, staying somewhere unknown, breaking the pattern of accessibility that her stalker had established. Sarah knew he was right, knew that remaining in a house someone could enter at will was a decision that prioritized pride over survival. But she also knew that leaving would not solve the underlying problem, would only relocate it temporarily while the stalker adjusted and adapted and eventually found her again wherever she had hidden. Running was not a solution. It was a delay, a pause in a progression that would resume whenever the pursuer chose to resume it. If she was going to end this, she had to understand it first, had to know who was hunting her and why and what they ultimately wanted. The first camera failed at 11:47, its feed replaced by static that scrolled across the laptop screen like visual white noise. The second followed moments later, then the third, then the fourth, a cascade of failures that progressed through her security network with systematic precision until every camera displayed nothing but electronic snow. The motion sensors had not triggered, the alarms had not sounded. But somewhere in her house, in the spaces the cameras could no longer see, someone was moving with the confidence of a person who had done this many times before. She did not want to go to her bedroom. She did not want to discover what had been left for her this time. But her feet carried her toward the stairs anyway, toward the room where she had woken with impossible keys pressed against her cheek, toward whatever new violation awaited her in the space that should have been her sanctuary. The bedroom door was closed, though she had left it open. The light switch did not respond when she flipped it, and in the darkness that swallowed her room, she could hear breathing that was not her own, slow and steady and patient, the respiration of someone who had been waiting for this moment with anticipation that bordered on reverence. He said he had never left. He said he had been living in the walls and the spaces between rooms that the architect had designed for purposes the real estate agent had never mentioned. He said he had watched her every day for 3 years, had fallen in love with her routines and her habits, and the way she talked to herself when she thought she was alone. He said he had been patient, had waited for her to notice him, had left gifts and messages hoping she would understand the depth of his devotion. He said he was tired of waiting. He said it was time for them to be together properly. He said he had prepared a space for her in the walls where no one would ever find them, where they could live together forever, where she would learn to love him the way he had always loved her. Sarah ran, but the house she thought she knew had changed, hallways extending in directions that made no sense, doors opening onto rooms she had never seen, architecture shifting to accommodate purposes she was only now beginning to understand. Behind her, footsteps followed at a pace that matched her own, never faster, never slower, maintaining the exact distance that demonstrated complete control over the encounter. The front door was gone when she reached where it should have been, replaced by a wall that had not existed when she walked past it that morning. The windows would not break despite her desperate attempts. The phone in her pocket had no signal, its screen displaying only a photograph of her sleeping, taken from an angle that suggested the photographer had been lying beside her. The house had never been hers. It had always been his. And now, finally, after 3 years of patient waiting, he was ready to bring her home.